My brother secretly married my girlfriend of 3 years. Then my own family demanded I forgive them and move on. So I made one decision that shocked everyone forever. I'm not someone who talks about his personal life online. I've had this account for 4 years and mostly lurk on engineering forums and the occasional terrible home renovation thread. But I've been sitting on this for 2 months now and I need to put it somewhere outside my own head. So here it is. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that 3 months ago I found out my brother married my girlfriend secretly. 6 weeks before I found out while I was away on a project contract 3 hours from home. Let me back up. I'm 33. Civil structural engineer. I assess load-bearing systems, inspect infrastructure, work on project compliance for construction firms. It's precise, methodical work. You learn pretty quickly that emotions are useful data but terrible decision makers. That mindset probably saved me when everything fell apart. Lyra and I had been together for 3 years. She's a freelance interior designer, talented, social, good at reading rooms and reading people. We met through a mutual contact at an industry event, started talking and it clicked fast. By year 2 we were talking seriously about a future, a property, eventually a family. I wasn't rushing it but I wasn't stalling either. I meant every conversation we had about it. My brother Caden is 29, 4 years younger than me, and in almost every measurable way he spent his life in my shadow. Not because I put him there but because he never built anything of his own to stand on. Our parents Osmira and Talon spent years smoothing that over. Every time Caden failed a course, quit a job, burned a relationship, they reframed it. Called it finding himself. Called it bad luck. I was always the one expected to say nothing, absorb the disruption and keep moving. I did that for a long time because I genuinely loved my family and I genuinely didn't think it was worth the conflict. That's the part I've had to sit with. I made it easy for them to underestimate me. The night I found out I was home. It was a Tuesday. I'd just come back from 6 weeks on a project in another city. Long hours site work, the kind of contract that keeps your head down and your phone half dead most days. I remember I was eating dinner at my kitchen table, already half checked out for the night. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. One image attached. It was a photo taken through a glass door, slightly angled, grainy but clear enough. Caden and Lyra standing at a registrar's counter. She was holding documents. He had his hand on her back. The date stamp in the corner of the photo read 6 weeks earlier. Whoever sent it had also photographed the visible edge of a marriage certificate on the counter. I looked at that photo for a long time. Here's the thing, people probably expect that I put my fist through a wall or called Lyra screaming or drove to Caden's apartment at midnight. I didn't do any of that. What actually happened is that something inside me just stopped. Not broke. Stopped. Like a system that detects a critical error and shuts down non-essential functions to protect the core. I set my phone face down on the table. I poured a glass of water. I didn't drink it. I sat in my kitchen for 2 hours and I didn't move much and I didn't call anyone. I just let my brain do what it does when I'm on a job site and something doesn't add up. I started running the structure of it. How long? How planned? Who else would have had to know? What it meant for everything I thought was in place. Lyra texted me at 9:25 p.m. Hey, you eat yet? Thinking about you. I read it. I didn't respond. By the time I got up from that table, the grief was still there. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't. 3 years. A future I'd actually believed in. A brother I'd defended more times than I could count. But underneath the grief was something else. Something that felt less like emotion and more like clarity. I went to my desk, opened my typed 2 words into the search bar: asset transfer fraud. The screen lit up the room. I started reading. I want to be clear about something before I get into this part. I'm not a paranoid person. I don't go looking for problems. In 3 years with Lyra, I never once went through her phone, questioned her about where she was, or built suspicion out of nothing. That's not who I am. So when I say I started digging, I want you to understand I wasn't unraveling. I was responding to evidence that had already been handed to me. There's a difference. That first night I read for 3 hours. Property law, fraudulent transfer statutes, what constitutes identity misuse in a financial application. I wasn't panicking. I was building a framework. If something had been done, I needed to understand the shape of it before I could figure out how far it went. The next morning I texted Lyra back, told her I'd fallen asleep early, sorry for the late reply. She sent a string of casual messages. I matched her energy exactly. Warm enough, normal enough. She had no idea. I kept it up for 3 weeks. On day 3 I contacted a man named Harrow, not a private investigator in the dramatic sense. He works in document verification and financial fraud tracing, mostly for commercial contract disputes. A colleague had used him 2 years earlier when a subcontractor tried to double bill a municipal project. Harrow is thorough, discreet and expensive. I paid him in cash installments. I told nobody. What he brought back came in layers. Each one worse than the last. The first layer was the timeline. Caden and Lyra had been in regular contact beyond what any casual family connection would explain for 14 months. It started 4 months into my project travel cycle when my schedule became predictable and my availability dropped. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't two people who fell into something messy and didn't know how to stop. It was deliberate, planned around my absence like a construction schedule plans around a weather window. The second layer was financial. Lyra had access to my apartment. She had a key, had stayed there regularly. Harrow's work on her phone's document metadata showed she had photographed private financial papers on at least 6 separate occasions. Account statements, a co-investment property agreement I'd drafted with both our names as a future plan, never signed, never submitted, sitting in a folder in my home office. She'd photographed every page of it. There was also a business loan application that had been submitted to a lending body partially using my professional credentials and income documentation. I had never seen that application. I had never signed it. The third layer was the one that could have genuinely cost me something permanent. Caden had submitted a document to the Regional Property Registry attempting to list himself as co-owner of a plot of land I purchased outright 2 years ago. Solo purchase, my name only, fully paid. The submission included what was supposed to be my signature as co-authorizing the change. It wasn't my signature. Harrow put it side by side with my actual signature from 3 different documents, and the differences were visible without being an expert. The transfer hadn't processed. A backlog in the registry office had delayed it. If it had gone through before I found out, unpicking it would have been a legal nightmare. The fourth layer was the one I hadn't expected and the one that changed the nature of everything. Osmira had known about the marriage for at least 2 weeks before that photo reached me. Harrow didn't discover this. I did on my own by going back through a phone call I'd had with my mother 8 days after the photo arrived. A call where I said nothing about what I knew and she said nothing about what she knew. I pulled the message history between her and Lyra after that. It was all there. Congratulations. Dinner plans. And one message from Osmira to Lyra that read, don't bring up the property thing. That's between Caden and his lawyer. Viral doesn't need to know any of that right now. I read that message 4 times. Then I contacted my attorney and told him to prepare 3 separate filings. Not submit. Prepare. I wanted everything ready before I moved. By the end of that week, every document was in order. Every file was organized, labeled, and backed up in 2 locations. That's when my phone buzzed. Osmira, we're planning a family dinner. Everyone needs to sit down together and talk. Come home this weekend. This family doesn't fall apart. I read it twice, then I typed back, I'll be there. The drive to my parents' house takes 40 minutes on a clear day. I used that time to think. Not about what I was going to say, because I already knew exactly what I was going to say. I used it to settle, to make sure the version of me that walked through that door was the version I needed to be. Not numb. Not performed. Just controlled. There's a specific kind of discipline required to walk into a room full of people who have underestimated you and give them absolutely no reason to revise that opinion. Not yet. I stopped at a bakery on the way and picked up a box of pastries. The kind my mother likes. I want you to understand why I did that. It wasn't to be cruel. It wasn't theater for my own amusement. It was because I had spent 3 years being a reliable, considerate presence in that family, and I was not going to let them rewrite that history by turning me into someone volatile on the day it mattered most. I was going to be exactly who I had always been right up until the moment I wasn't. I arrived at 1 p.m. Osmira opened the door before I knocked. She hugged me. I hugged her back. She took the pastry box and said something about how I didn't have to do that, and I said it was nothing. Talon was in the living room. He stood when I came in and we shook hands the way we always do, firm, brief, a little formal. That's just who he is, who we are together. Caden and Lyra were already there. Caden was sitting in the armchair near the window, the one he always gravitates toward because it puts him slightly elevated relative to whoever sits on the couch. I noticed that. Lyra was beside him on the adjacent seat, not quite touching him. She looked up when I walked in and then looked back down almost immediately. Caden gave me a nod. I nodded back. I sat on the couch, accepted the coffee Osmira brought, asked Talon about a local overpass project I'd seen in the news. There had been concerns about the foundation assessment. He answered. We talked about it for 4 minutes. Actual normal conversation. I could feel Lyra watching me from across the room the entire time, trying to read something in my face that wasn't there. Then Osmira sat down and the air shifted in that way it does when someone decides it's time to begin. She led it the way I knew she would. Careful language. Framing designed to distribute the discomfort evenly so nobody had to sit fully inside it. The summary of her position, delivered gently but clearly, was this: yes, the situation developed in a way that wasn't ideal, and yes, Viral deserved better communication, but Caden and Lyra are married now, and that is a reality the family needs to accept and move forward from. The word she used most was forward. Caden spoke next. He said that feelings developed in a way he didn't expect, and he never wanted it to go like this. He said he'd tried to find the right time to tell me and it never came. That sentence, the right time never came, I filed it away. 14 months and the right time never came. Lyra said she was sorry for how it happened. Not for what happened. The distinction was precise and I don't think she even realized she'd made it. Talon said I was strong enough to handle this better than most men would. A compliment dressed as instruction. I listened to all of it. I asked Caden a question about his current work contract, something bland, something that had nothing to do with any of it. He answered confused but relieved that I seemed to be engaging normally. I asked Lyra how a particular client project of hers had gone, one she'd mentioned months ago. She said it wrapped up well, her voice cautious. I nodded, set my coffee down, then I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a short HDMI cable, leaned over and plugged one end into my phone and the other end of the port on the side of the living room television. The same television I'd helped to lend mount on that wall 2 summers ago. Osmira smiled, the kind of smile that thinks it knows what's coming, a concession, maybe an acknowledgement, something that would let her close the afternoon neatly. Before we close this out, I said, and my voice was completely even, I just want to show everyone something. The TV flickered on. Nobody spoke for the first 30 seconds. I had the files organized in a single folder, numbered sequential. No dramatic music, no title slide, just a plain dark background and the first document open and filling the screen. I stood to the side so nobody's view was blocked. Professional habit. The first thing I put up was the message chain. 14 months of it. I didn't scroll through all of it. I'd selected 12 screenshots that covered the critical points. Timestamps visible. Names visible. I let them sit on screen long enough to be read fully before moving forward. The room read in silence. The first screenshot was from early in the chain, Caden asking Lyra what Viral's project schedule looked like for the following month. Not how is he doing. Not when is he back. Specifically, what does his schedule look like. Lyra answering in detail. Dates, locations, how reachable I'd be. I heard Osmira draw a slow breath. I moved forward. A message from Lyra 10 months in. He's going to lose his mind. Caden's reply beneath it. Let him, we'll be set by then. Caden stood up. That's out of context. I moved to the next file without looking at him. He kept talking. I kept moving. After about 15 seconds he stopped because there was nothing to talk over. The screen just kept going. Second set. The property registry document. I put up the filing first. Caden listed as co-owner of the land plot. Submission date, reference number. Then I put up the signature comparison on a split screen. The signature on the filing on the left, 3 verified samples of my actual signature on the right. Harrow had annotated it. The differences were not subtle once you knew where to look. Lyra's face had gone completely still. Talon was leaning forward now, elbows on his knees, staring at the screen. He hadn't spoken since the messages went up. Third set. The loan application. I put up the front page. My name, my professional credentials, my income figures. Then the metadata sheet Harrow had pulled from the document, photographs. Timestamps. GPS coordinates matching my apartment address. Dates that matched afternoons Lyra had been at my place alone while I was running late on site. Lyra said, Viral, that's not. And then stopped, because there was nowhere for the sentence to go. I held up one finger. Not yet. I opened the audio folder. There are 3 recordings, I said. Still the same even tone. I'll play them once each. The first clip was 42 seconds. Caden's voice clear, unhurried, talking to someone I never identified, saying the transfer just needed to process before I got back from the project. That after that it was clean. The word clean sitting in the room like something physical. Nobody in that room had any doubt whose voice it was. Caden's jaw tightened. He didn't say out of context this time. The second clip was Lyra. A phone call with Caden 3 weeks before the photo reached me. They were discussing what to do if I got suspicious before they were ready. Her tone was not panicked. It was not conflicted. It was the tone of someone working through a logistical problem. Practical. Almost bored. I watched something shift in the room when that clip played. Because up until that point I think Osmira and Talon had been holding on to a version of events where Lyra was a woman who had made a terrible emotional mistake. The clip didn't leave room for that version. It erased it cleanly and didn't offer a replacement. Lyra had both hands pressed flat against her knees. She was staring at the floor. The third clip started and Osmira recognized her own voice within 4 seconds. It was from a call between her and Talon, picked up accidentally when I called my father and he'd left the line open. Osmira clearly not knowing I was on the line, saying plainly that I would be upset but I'd absorb it because I always did. And then the important thing is Caden doesn't lose the property filing before it goes through. Talon's silence in the recording lasted 11 seconds. I had counted. The clip ended. Osmira stood up. Her voice was unsteady in a way I had never heard before. That was a private conversation. You had no right. I'm not here for a debate, I said. I picked up my phone, opened a different screen entirely and held it up so the room could see the document clearly. The legal filings went through on Thursday, I said. All 3 of them. The document on my phone screen was a confirmation email from my attorney. Filing reference numbers, case identifiers, timestamps, the kind of correspondence that doesn't leave room for interpretation. Caden crossed the room in 3 steps. Not toward the screen, toward me. He stopped about 2 feet away, close enough that it was meant to feel like pressure. He's 2 inches shorter than me and has never once in his life intimidated me, but I understood what he was trying to do. I stood where I was, didn't shift back, didn't shift forward, just waited. "What did you file?" he said. Not a question, a demand with the punctuation stripped out. I told him plainly the first filing was with the Regional Property Registry Fraud Division. The forged transfer document was now flagged under formal review and Caden's name had been flagged in connection with a fraudulent submission. Any further property dealings tied to his identification were frozen pending the outcome of that investigation. The land remained solely in my name. It had never legally changed, but now there was an official record of the attempt. The second filing was with the Financial Crimes Unit. The loan application submitted using my credentials without my authorization had been reported. The lending body had been notified and had opened their own internal review. Depending on how that review concluded, the exposure wasn't just civil. The third was a civil complaint against Lyra specifically for unauthorized access and reproduction of private financial document. Her attorney and she would need one would advise her on what that meant for her practically. But the short version was that the metadata, the timestamps and the location data made the case straightforward. I also told them about the bank accounts. Any account connected to these actions directly or through the paper trail Harrow had reconstructed had been flagged with the relevant institutions. Not emptied. Flagged, which meant that any movement, any transfer, any attempt to shift funds triggered an automatic alert to the reviewing body. The window they had planned to use to quietly build a financial base from what they'd taken or tried to take from me was closed. Had been closed since Thursday. Caden's expression moved through 3 things in about 4 seconds. Anger, then calculation, then something that looked a lot like the specific panic of a person realizing the exit they assumed was there has been sealed. "You can withdraw those filings," he said. His voice had changed, the demand was gone. "We can fix this, just withdraw them and we sit down and sort this out like." "No," I said. Lyra had been quiet since the third clip played. Now she wasn't. She started talking about how she knew this looked bad, how she understood why I was angry, how she never wanted it to reach this point, how she still cared about me as a person and that had never changed. The words came fast and they kept shifting shape, and I noticed that each version of the explanation contradicted the one before it. First it was emotions she couldn't control. Then it was a plan that was never supposed to go as far as it did. Then it was Caden's idea and she had doubts the entire time. I didn't engage with any of it. Not because I felt nothing. I want to be honest about that. Standing in that room listening to Lyra's voice cycle through justifications, there was grief in it for me. Real grief. The kind that doesn't announce itself loudly but sits in your chest like weight. I had loved her. I had meant everything I said about a future. That was real even if nothing she gave me in return was. But grief is information. It's not instruction. Osmira came at me differently. She talked about carrying both her sons. About what this family had built and what I was dismantling. She said the word family 7 times. I counted because counting things is how I stay level when the room is loud. Talon said I was going too far. That one landed differently than I expected, not because it hurt but because it was the first thing he'd said since the recordings played. He'd sat through hearing his own silence used as evidence and his response was that I was going too far. I looked at him for a moment. Then I reached down and picked up my jacket from the arm of the couch. Osmira moved. She stepped directly in front of the door. Both of us knew she wasn't going to physically stop me. That wasn't the point. The point was the gesture. The demand that I stay in that room until the situation resolved in a way that was acceptable to her. She looked at me and said, "You are not leaving this house until we resolve this." I looked at her for a long moment. My mother. A woman I had driven 40 minutes to see every few weeks for my entire adult life. A woman whose voice I had just played back to her from a recording where she talked about me like I was a variable in someone else's equation. "It's already resolved, Mom," I said. "I did that without you." I waited. She didn't move for 3 full seconds. Then she did. I walked out of that house at 3:14 p.m. I know the exact time because I checked my phone when I got to my car. Not for any particular reason, just habit. I note timestamps. It's what I do. I sat in the driver's seat for a minute, not from hesitation but because I've been running on a very specific kind of controlled energy for the past 2 hours and I wanted to let it settle before I drove. Then I pulled out and didn't look back at the house. That was 2 months ago. I'm writing this now because enough has resolved that the story has a shape and I'd rather put it down once completely than carry it in pieces. Here's what happened after. The property fraud investigation concluded 4 weeks later. The forged filing was formally annulled, removed from the registry, flagged in Caden's record. He received an official caution, which in practical terms means it sits on his history and surfaces whenever his name is run through any future property or legal process. It won't disappear. The land is clean in my name with a paper trail now so thorough that nothing like that attempt could succeed even if someone tried again. The Financial Crimes Review took longer. The lending body completed their internal process 6 weeks after my filing and concluded that the application had contained falsified credentials. They've referred it for civil prosecution. That case is ongoing. Caden is named. So is Lyra as a secondary party. Their combined legal costs at this point are significant. I know this not because I'm tracking it with satisfaction but because my attorney keeps me informed on case developments as a matter of procedure. Lyra settled the civil complaint against her out of court. The terms are sealed, which is standard. What I can tell you is that her attorney advised settlement early, which tells you everything about how defensible her position was. She reached out to me once through her attorney's office asking if there was any path to a conversation. I declined through my own attorney. There was nothing left to say that the evidence hadn't already said more clearly than I could. The social piece I handled quietly. I have an uncle Farron, my father's older brother, someone who has always operated with a level of integrity the rest of that side of the family aspires to and doesn't always reach. I sat with him once, showed him what I'd shown the living room and answered his questions honestly. I didn't ask him to do anything with it. I just thought he deserved to know the truth from me directly rather than through whatever version Osmira and Talon would eventually construct. Farron is not a dramatic man. He asked a few careful questions, thanked me for telling him, and that was the end of the conversation. What happened within the extended family after that I wasn't present for. What I know is that the calls Osmira made to relatives in the weeks that followed did not land the way she expected them to. People had already heard something else. Caden and Lyra's marriage is apparently not doing well. I heard this from Farron, who mentioned it briefly in passing. I didn't ask follow-up questions. It's not something I need the details of. Their marriage collapsing or holding together changes nothing about what they did or what I did in response. My parents have called 11 times between them over the past 2 months. I haven't answered. I sent one written message, not an email, a physical letter, because I wanted it to exist in a form that couldn't be screenshotted and misrepresented. The letter said one thing: that I wasn't interested in contact until there was genuine accountability, not crisis management. That I knew the difference. That they should take their time. I haven't heard back. I'm not waiting. I moved apartments 3 weeks after the gathering. Same city, different neighborhood, closer to a project site I've been assigned to. The new place is smaller but the light is better and I sleep without any problem, which I mention only because I think some people expect the aftermath of something like this to be sleepless and fractured. It hasn't been. I think because I made my decisions early, made them clearly, and didn't flinch when it was time to follow through. There's a specific kind of peace that comes from that. Not happiness exactly. Just solidity. Like a structure that's been properly assessed and reinforced. 3 years. A brother, a woman I trusted, parents I drove 40 minutes to see without ever being asked. I don't regret any of the time. I regret none of what I did when it ended. Some structures fail because the materials were always compromised. You don't rebuild with the same materials. You document the failure, clear the site, and start with something better. That's where I am now. The site is clear. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you really like our videos, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Have a great day.